Hello, everyone. My name is Jacob Fortum. I'm the host of this podcast, Doers Within Emerging Markets. And I just want to share my experience with using Anchor so far. So when the pandemic started, I thought about starting a podcast. And the whole idea was to bring in some really amazing folks that are doing some great work in their respective industries within the emerging markets. And the Anchor platform really helped me get the word out there and also just make it a lot easier for me to invite the guest and just share the amazing experiences they've had and the amazing work they're doing in their respective industries within the emerging markets. So it's pretty fun. You don't even worry about the technical part of making a podcast. You actually just focus more on the content. And Anchor has done it really well for me. So I will highly encourage anybody who is trying to start a podcast to try to use just check out Anchor, and I think you won't regret it. I'm not a technical person, but if you listen to these episodes that I've been publishing so far, it seems like I know the technical part of it, but Anchor helps you take care of the technical part, and you just focus on the content. So feel free to check it out. I highly encourage you. Won't regret it, and it's right there. You don't pay anything, so. In times like this, I think starting a podcast and getting the word out there, irrespective of what you're doing, will be a really great experience. So thank you guys for listening to my episodes. Please check out Anchor and you will have a great time. So cheers, guys, and see you guys next episode. Thanks. Are just outstanding, and I've learned a lot from you as someone that came from West Africa, and you have shown the highest of what an African can achieve in the United States. So, but beyond that, you're just a nice person, and you have shown that consistently in your faith, but also how you do your work. So.
Thanks, man. Thanks. Anytime I can support your ministry. Let me know.
So, but I really love to welcome you on this podcast. The premise of this podcast and what I was thinking about when I started this was just to talk to extraordinary leaders, entrepreneurs, researchers, investors, activists that are focused on creating and enlightening others on the vast opportunities that exist within the emerging markets across the globe. And I think you really, you are the embodiment of what we think of someone who is, really advocating for how we think differently about emerging markets, but how we can take the right actions that are needed for markets in these areas to really do well, and from a government perspective, from a private sector perspective. So it's really an honor, and I know we have a personal relationship, but I think I'm really humbled that you took the time to come here. So just to begin with, and to make it very light, I just want you to share with the audience just a little bit about yourself. Maybe you grew up in Nigeria, how you came to the United States. I think that would be a good place for us to start.
That sounds good. Thank you, Jacob, for inviting me. Really honored to join you here and to be able to share and learn from your audience. So thank you. So I grew up in Nigeria until I was 16. I moved to the US in 2000 for college, and I had no intentions of ever going back home. I was sort of the typical immigrant story from a poor country. You find opportunity in a much richer country. And so, family bought a one-way ticket, and it was, go and better yourself. And I was fortunate. I graduated college in 2005, studied engineering, started working as an engineer. And I did that for 8 years before I transitioned to business school. But a lot happened in the 8 years, which I think we'll talk a little bit about today. But yeah, it's been a journey so far, and very excited to share today.
That's awesome. And can you just tell a little bit about? I know you have had some really amazing TED Talks. So by the way, to all the audience members, I think Efosa has a really great TED Talk on how we can think of corruption differently. And it's an incredible TED Talk, and I will go a little bit more into it when we talk about the book that he co-authored with the great late Professor Christensen. And so I mean, that TED Talk was great. And just to piggyback on that, how was it like? Just, I mean, if we could go to like growing up in Nigeria, and you have, I don't know what it was, that TED Talk, but like another TED Talk you did, you mentioned a little bit about just a glimpse of poverty in Nigeria, and how you just growing up in that environment, and talking about the little girl that kind of walking miles to carry water and coming back. How did that being in Nigeria and being in the US, how did that shape your perspective about just poverty, and kind of giving you that mindset of like poverty is something that I have to be thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think growing up in Nigeria, and my guess is it's similar for many other people in emerging economies that have grown up there. One of the most distinctive things that happens to you is poverty. The idea of poverty, the reality of poverty, becomes normalized. It is all you see, it is all you hear about, it is all people talk about: the suffering, the poverty, the death, the destitution. And so that becomes your frame of reference for everything and becomes normalized. Now, what that means is the urgency to fix the problem, the urgency to make life better for people vanishes. It's not there anymore, because again, it's normal. When something is normal, there's no urgency. If your house is burning, that's not normal. There's an urgency to put out the fire. But when something gets normalized, then there's no urgency. Now, what happened to me was when I came to the US, something else got normalized, which was prosperity, which was a better life for people. Just the idea that people could get sick, go to a hospital and get well. People could go to school and learn and get a job and get access to clean water in their homes and food. That became normalized. And so I was now dealing with this huge delta between normalized poverty and normalized prosperity. And I realized, oh my gosh, we have to figure out a solution. We who are fortunate, right, to have this idea that prosperity is the norm and should be the norm. We have to figure out a solution for how to, number one, make poverty an urgent problem, and number two, get people to solve that urgent problem.
That's right. And just piggybacking on that, is that this, coming to this conclusion that you've just mentioned, what was the thing that convinced you to get into this field, to do research on emerging markets, and just to, I follow your tweets, and you have some really amazing LinkedIn updates, that's about the book that we'll talk about in a few minutes. But the approach that you use as being a researcher, and a really good one, what was that thing that made you convinced that was where you could actually kind of talk more about this delta that you have mentioned?
Yeah, so for me, it really all started when I began reading about development, economics, poverty in several popular books, right? So The End of Poverty by Jeffrey Sachs, The White Man's Burden by William Easterly, The Bottom Billion by Paul Collier. These are all economics professors, NYU, Columbia. I think Collier's at Oxford or Cambridge, I forget. But yeah. So I started reading their books, and it was fascinating, right? Mm-hmm. It was fascinating to me. But here's the thing: the approach many of these books took was policy. Let's change policy. Let's do much better aid, foreign aid. And it was a very high-level top-down approach, and somehow that just was not working. And so I thought to myself, I need to try and figure out if there's another way, and that really led me to business school, which is where I met the late Professor Christensen. But my introduction to just this poverty landscape was through the writings of many of these professors.
Yeah, and just and thanks so much for sharing that. I think this gives some context to how amazing you are as a researcher, and it's there's always a build up to where people get to where they are, and I think that was worth sharing. And I mean, this year started off. We had all the 2020 vision, and people were very excited about this new decade. And unfortunately, Professor Christensen passed away. One of the news that we received earlier this year. Can you just please? We all know he was just an extraordinary innovator, thinker, entrepreneur, professor of one of a kind, and as someone that worked very closely with him and saw him day to day, just a really nice person. I can imagine. Can you just share a little bit about what it was like working with him, and a few things that you learned from him that you can share with us?
Yeah, I mean, Professor Christensen was he's a legend. He was incredibly brilliant, incredibly humble, and incredibly kind. Those three things, right? And it's very difficult to find those three things in people. Just incredible brilliance, humility, and kindness. In terms of his brilliance, he had a way of changing the way you saw the world. And so, there are many people in the world who are really, really brilliant, and you meet them and you walk away feeling like, oh man, that's a really brilliant person. I want to be like them, or I want to amass a lot of knowledge, right? So you're like, man, they're just so knowledgeable about a lot of things. The difference with Professor Christensen's brilliance is when you walked away from him, you saw the world in a very different way that empowered you. And so it was as if he gave a little bit of his brilliance to you without even you knowing it, and you walked away feeling a lot smarter and a lot wiser. And so it's just been, it was a pleasure to work with him, to get to know him. I felt like it's the first time I felt this with any mentor, really, any boss. I felt like he truly loved me. And I've had great bosses, right? And I know they cared for me, but with Professor Christensen, he was almost like a father figure to me, which is just it's very rare in today's world.
Yeah. Thanks so much for sharing that. And someone that I've been fortunate to know you as well, I think you emulate those qualities that you made about Late Professor Christensen. So I think he saw something that in you that he saw in himself, and I know that you're gonna carry on his legacy with what you're doing, and I think there's so much in store for you that he'll be really proud of. So thanks so much for sharing that. Just leading into the next question, can you just tell us a little bit about the Christensen Institute? Or, how you got to know about the institute to begin with, and what you guys have been doing, and what you guys plan on doing in the coming years.
Yeah, so the Christensen Institute is a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank. It's based in Boston and Silicon Valley, and really what's at the core of what we do is we take theories, management theories, innovation theories that Professor Christensen developed or co-developed, and we apply them to really complex social issues. We have an education group that applies the theories to the education sector. We have a healthcare group that does the same for healthcare. We have my group, which is Global Prosperity, looking at the world of emerging economies and how can we create prosperity in countries. How do we change the paradigm, reframe the conversation from let's go and eradicate poverty to let us actually create prosperity. And so that's what the Christensen Institute does. We really seek to raise awareness about these new ideas that we are developing. We want to change people's attitudes towards the role of innovation and theories in how they can help them do their jobs better. And we want to increase adoption of these ideas in different organizations. And we want to help organizations do that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think while you were working at the Christensen Institute with Late Professor Christensen, and you guys co-authored this amazing book. And I remember behind the scenes while you were writing this book, it wasn't easy.
That's right.
Yeah, I remember the chapters. We had to. Behind the scene, it wasn't pretty, and I saw the hard work put into it. Like, sincerely, there was so much effort and long nights that you. Can you just give us behind the scene what it takes to write a book to begin with, and we'll go into what the book was about, what it's about.
Absolutely. So writing a book it's like running a marathon that you're not sure you're going to finish. And even when you finish, success is often based on people watching the tape of you running the marathon. And so it's really a story in perseverance. It's a story in partnership. I would say perseverance, partnership, and staying the course, right? And which is connected to perseverance. Now, in terms of writing this book, it was amazing because I had a great team, right? Professor Christensen had written like 11 other books. Karen Dillon, who's a co-author, had written, I think, 2 other books with Professor Christensen, and she used to be an editor at Harvard Business Review. So I was very fortunate, right? But it doesn't mean there weren't difficulties. I think we wanted to write a book that would change the way people thought, that would challenge the paradigms they held so dear. But whenever you do that, right, there's always a chance that you would insult people unknowingly, right? Saying, what you think is wrong. And so we had to be very delicate in the way we communicated our ideas, because that was not the point. The point of the book was to add value to this world of how do we make life better for people in emerging economies through innovation. And if we did not write it in such a way that changed the way people saw the world and inspired them, then it would have been a lost cause. And so I just think it was tough, but it was good.
Yeah. I know you talked about the team that you worked on, and we know Late Professor Christensen had the framework in his theories and concepts was like the kind of the foundation of how you thought about the book, right? Like the non-consumption that you always mention in the book, and just that prosperity paradox by itself is like the nooks and crannies of what is based on what Late Professor Christensen working about. I wanted to a little bit share about the impact that Karen Dillon had in the process of writing the book, and I know Late Professor Christensen's wife also did some reviews. What was it like working with Karen and Late Professor Christensen's wife that make that team what it is and kind of led to the success that the book has been?
Oh, I mean, it was truly, truly remarkable. Karen Dillon is easily the best editor I have met in my life. I've had different people edit my work, and Karen Dillon is easily the best. I think what makes her special is she knows how to meet your work where it is and then make it better. She believes the best in what you're trying to say, and then she really tries to get it out of you and say, okay, how can we craft it in a way that will appeal to as many people as possible so you can have maximum impact. And so it's just been remarkable working with them.
Yeah. And just let's talk about the prosperity paradox. So can you give a brief synopsis of what the prosperity paradox is? And this book has, from my perspective and just talking to people about it, I just recently attended this, this Zoom meetup where we had like Africans in diaspora talking about how young people can create change on the continent, and your book was the book of reference. Like, we had to read the book to attend this Zoom call, and so it has had an enormous impact on how young people are thinking about it, but also how government officials, international bodies should be thinking about international development and innovation, and how we should think of solving poverty. So if you don't mind sharing a little bit about the synopsis, and also what has been your the reception that you have received over time. I know you mentioned earlier a little bit about people felt a little bit challenged, if I'm wrong, but what is the synopsis? What has been some of the challenges or positive reception you have received, and how do you think the book will be applied moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. At the core of the idea of the book, right, it really connected to my experience in learning about poverty and trying to solve it. The core of the idea is that you actually don't fix poverty by focusing on fixing poverty. That limits the activities you can do. It limits your ability to be creative and innovative. Instead, you fix poverty by focusing on creating prosperity. That's really the core idea. It's a paradox, right? You actually don't fix poverty by trying to fix it. Now, what does that mean? Well, when you try to fix poverty, you focus so much on lack. What do people lack, right? You go to a poor community, you see they don't have clothes, they don't have shoes, they don't have homes, they don't have schools, they don't have hospitals, roads, good governance. You focus on all those things and you say, oh, let me give them all these things, because that is what prosperity looks like. Prosperity looks like people with clothes, people with food, people with homes. And so there's this sort of, I want to transfer these resources to these people so that they can stop lacking. That is what the dominant development industry strategy has been for the last 60, 70 years. but it hasn't really made much progress. If you were poor 70 years ago, you're still a poor country today. When we look at what has worked, it is countries that have prioritized innovation and entrepreneurship of a certain kind, that have created new markets in their countries, in global markets, and have, as a result of creating these new markets, made life a lot better for so many people, because they've created jobs, they've created new tax revenues, they've created and fostered a culture of entrepreneurship and innovation. And now what I mean by that is, when you look at innovation activity, we categorize them from an economic development standpoint in three types, right? Market creating innovations, sustaining innovations, and efficiency innovations. Now, what our message is in the book is, by investing in market creating innovations, which I'll define here in a second, countries can create jobs, create or generate new tax revenues, and really foster a culture of innovation and entrepreneurship. Chapter 2 in the book is titled "Not All Innovation is Created Equal." And what we did there is say, all right, when I say the word innovation, you have different things come to your mind. So we had to define what it was and really categorize it properly. So the first type, we say efficiency innovations. These are innovations that enable companies to do more with less. And so when a company does some automation to reduce labor costs or outsources jobs to other countries, that's an efficiency innovation. Now, they release cash flows, but when you look at the development impact from where the efficiency innovation was enacted, it doesn't create prosperity. It actually eliminates prosperity. Just ask all the people who have lost jobs as a result of their jobs moving to another country or another region. The second type of innovation is called sustaining innovations, and these are innovations that make good products better. And so when a phone company puts a new feature on the phone, whether it's more memory, a better camera, or a faster processor, that's a sustaining innovations. These are innovations that target people who can already afford existing products. And when companies invest in sustaining innovations, keeps them vibrant, keeps them exciting. People want to work there. We want to work on the most challenging products and services. But again, because you're targeting a customer base that can already afford the product, you're not really creating a new market. You might expand it just a little bit, but it's not creating much development. Now, the most powerful, which is what the book focuses a lot on, is called market creating innovations. And these are innovations that transform complicated and expensive products into products that are simple and affordable. And when this happens, what you have is the creation of a new wealth engine for an organization and a society. Why do I say that? I say that because when you're able to make a product simple and affordable and target people who historically did not have access, companies generate revenues from new customers. We call them non-consumers, people who couldn't afford the products on the market before. So they become sort of big companies that are generating new revenues. They create jobs because you need many more people to serve these non-consumers that vastly outpopulate the consumers in the economy. They generate new tax revenues because now you have bigger companies that are creating jobs and growth and wealth. So they generate tax revenues, and very importantly, they foster a culture of innovation and entrepreneurship, because now new entrepreneurs, new investors want to participate in this new market that's being created. And so, an example would be the proliferation of mobile phones, inexpensive mobile phones and minutes all across the world, but more specifically, in Africa, India, Bangladesh, emerging economies. That's an example of a market creating innovation that has really taken the world by storm, right? If you look at the kind of economic impact that has triggered in these markets, you begin to get an appreciation for the power of market creating innovations.
Yeah, and I like this. I've heard you in your talks mention these 3 types of innovations, and I think it makes a lot of sense for most emerging markets, specifically in Africa, to see how these market creating innovations can, kind of pull in. I love you always talk about the pull versus push. Can you explain that with reference to market creating innovations?
Yeah. Absolutely. So, earlier I talked about this visceral reaction we get when we see or we go to a poor community. We see a lack of resources, right? A lack of food, a lack of water, a lack of clothes, a lack of schools, a lack of hospitals. We just see a lack. And the push strategy of development says, let me, with the best of intentions, go into these communities and push these resources so that they can prosper, right? So I push schools, I push clothes, I push hospitals, whether or not, they have the right equipment in there and the medicines and so on. I push all these things, but that rarely works. Many of the products and services we push in poor economies do not last and do not really create sustainable development. I'm a perfect example. Before business school, I started an organization called Poverty Stops Here. We went into communities that lacked water. And of course, what did I do? I pushed multiple water wells in these communities. Because in my head, the answer to no water well was water. And how do you get water? You build a well. Exactly. After 6 to 9 months, most of the wells broke down. And so not a sustainable strategy. And that really is a microcosm of the bigger development industry, pushing a lot of projects that don't work. Now, the corollary to that is the pool approach, where you actually don't go in to provide a resource that solves one particular problem. You take a step back and you think critically about a new market you can create that solves a challenge. Now, as a result of creating that new market, in order to solve the problem, the market pulls in so many things into the economy. It pulls in jobs, it pulls in taxes, it pulls in education, it pulls in infrastructure. And so an example of this would be the mobile telco I talked about earlier. In order to create a market that made the mobile phones affordable and accessible, companies had to, number one, raise financing. So pulled in this idea of financing into the economy. They had to educate people on how to build the telco infrastructure. And so they pulled in some kind of education. They had to build clinics in different communities where people would live. So it pulled in some form of healthcare. They had to build figure out how we were going to sell the cell phone minutes to people. So pulled in some kind of retail, pulled in distribution, pulled in electricity generation for the cell towers. And so you pull in all these things. Now, the pull strategy is different because when you pull in, because of the inherent connection to the market you're creating, right? This new market that's targeting non-consumption, the things you pull in are more likely to be sustainable. And that is a vastly different approach from the push strategy.
Yeah, that is eloquently said. And I think, leading to that, how has been based on what you're explaining in terms of the types of innovation, the pull versus push, the non-consumption market, which it's been like the market creating innovators and innovation kind of recognize and make products accessible. How has this pitch been received by the international communities, international organizations, governments in emerging markets? How has the reception been like? And is there any pushbacks, or what has been your reaction so far?
I mean, so it's been well received. However, we see this as a marathon. All right. I mean, there's not been a lot of pushback. I mean, there's been a little bit, but I mean, not a lot. So we see this as a marathon in that there are multiple steps before you get to adoption of a new paradigm. Mm-hmm. And so the first step is really to raise awareness and say, hey, there's this new thing out there that we'd like you to try. And so you have to figure out how to get it to as many people as possible and the relevant people who would consume the ideas. And then the second thing is, after they know about it, you want to change their mindset and say, hey, the way you think the world works may not be entirely true. And so that's sort of the phase we're in now, is let's have more intimate conversations and figure out how to design new programs that would help people make progress. And then the third is adoption. And so in terms of awareness, it's done quite well, right? We've given multiple TED Talks and been to several conferences. I mean, before COVID-19 was traveling a lot. And now we're getting to the place where we actually want to embed ourselves in organizations to help change the mindsets. And so in conversation with a prestigious university here in Massachusetts. I can't say the name yet until we're done with the deal, where we actually want to co-design a market creating innovation boot camp, a 2-day intensive boot camp that takes people through principles in the book and ideas, right?
It's amazing.
And so I think it's really it's a process, and so far so good. But we see this as a marathon, not a sprint, and I think we're gonna do pretty well.
Yeah, it's definitely a marathon. And just going to the next thing, I think one of the amazing TED Talks that I've watched was your TED Talk on reducing corruption. Takes a specific kind of investment. And really fascinating TED Talk, and I think it's shown, it brought to light chapter 9 of your book, that corruption is not a problem, it's a solution. Can you really give us, I mean, it's very counterintuitive just thinking about that. What was it like writing that chapter? I know, just coming from Cameroon, that we have had a president for almost 40 years. And corruption is embedded in our culture. How was it like writing that book, writing that chapter, and making the case for that?
I mean, I think what we are trying to do with our book is really, again, change the paradigm, right? It's change the way people think about many things they thought they knew and things they thought they just believed, right? And so I think for us, corruption was one. You could not, you just could not write about emerging economies without talking about corruption. And so what we did in that chapter is we said, instead of treating corruption as a moral problem, right? Corruption is bad. We need to eradicate it. So if you don't eradicate it, you're not going to grow. Obviously, there's a correlation between corruption and growth, or anti-corruption, if you will, and growth. And so that is a chapter that did not need to be written, because everyone knows that. What we did was we treated it in a more scientific way and said, yes, we all know corruption is, it's bad. No one likes it when someone steals from them or someone, asks for a bribe or something. And that's just not good. But instead of treating it as this moral problem, let's treat it as a scientific problem. Let's try to understand it. Let's try to understand, why do people engage in corruption? What problem is corruption solving that causes people to engage in it? Because people don't just wake up and say, I want to be corrupt because, I don't like it. I don't love it. I don't, it's like, there's a reason people are trying to be corrupt. And I think the approach we took was, to help people see corruption is solving a critical problem. It is the most efficient way in many of these economies, emerging economies, for people to make progress, for people to get access to more income, for people to get access to better services. And so if we understood corruption a bit better, we could then substitute it with something else, which are better paying jobs that would then reduce the incentive for people to be corrupt. And so that was the approach we took. And it seems to have been a popular chapter. Our TED Talk has reached almost 2 million views at this talk. So really excited.
Yeah, research has been well received, and I mean you were very comfortable in that TED Talk, making that, and I do think the people are kind of identifying that this paradigm shift is necessary for us to be market creating innovators on the continent. I'll just follow up some very light questions. I know you've traveled across the world. What was your favorite country and why?
Oh man, favorite country and why? That is a tough one, but I mean, my wife and I got the chance to travel to Peru. And that was beautiful. I mean, we went to Lima, Peru. We went to Ollantaytambo. We went to Machu Picchu, Cusco. So it was beautiful. I would say Peru was amazing.
I concur with you. I've just been to Lima, Peru, but I get that one. I get that. And also, as you traveled, I'm sure you've met some really amazing people across the globe. Who was someone that has inspired you? I mean, with the exception of your mentor, like that really made you to just feel encouraged and inspired to continue this work in emerging markets as you traveled pre-COVID. Is it any person or that you've met that just stood out?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of people. I mean, on my trip to Nigeria, I did meet a couple of really passionate, I would say, business people. One was Mr. Andrew Ali, who used to be the head of an organization called Africa Finance Corporation, an infrastructure investment firm. Another was Abubakar Suleiman, who is the current CEO of Sterling Bank, one of the big banks in Nigeria. And really, these guys are men who do not have to care about the development of Africa, so to speak. They're very successful, is what I mean. But they are committed and passionate to Africa's development. And I got to tell you, when I meet people like that, I'm hopeful. Now, that's from a mentor standpoint. From a standpoint of just sheer inspiration because of their grit, there were several entrepreneurs I met during my travels. I mean, one is a business school friend, Brian Meswe, young guy, was a consultant after business school, making good money, but again, committed to Africa's development and started a company called Life Stores Pharmacy, really trying to improve pharmacy supply chains and how we can get drugs to the average person in Nigeria. Another entrepreneur that I met, the guys at Kobo 360, which is a logistics company that's really trying to reshape logistics in Africa. And then I would say Bilikis Adebi Abiola, who really started a company after graduating from MIT. And the company is focused on really helping a lot of people in Nigeria turn their waste, recyclable waste, into wealth. So recycling company. So lots of inspiration from the continent of Africa, where I got to meet a lot of entrepreneurs.
Yeah, that's pretty. That's quite a list. and hopefully they do spread the word by their actions, and through your partnerships with you and the Christensen Institute. Your mission will move forward. Just to round up here, so as a successful author, entrepreneur, and advisor, how can you, what is the advice you give for entrepreneurs and investors in general, or specific to the emerging markets?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are three. The first one is some of the most exciting opportunities are not obvious. And so if you think of an opportunity and it's too obvious, it probably means the market has been created, right? So that's the first one. The second one is when you look at emerging economies and you see people suffering, people struggling, people don't have access to a product or service that is very available in richer countries, instead of thinking of these as, oh, they're so poor and they're beneficiaries, think of that as an opportunity to innovate, as an opportunity to provide that product or service. Now, that does not point to the solution. That points to the problem. That points to the opportunity. The solution really is in how you will innovate a new business model to solve that problem. But you have to see it as an opportunity before you begin thinking about the solution. And I think that the third thing for emerging market entrepreneurs and investors to realize is that development, creation, prosperity is a process. It's not an event. If they take the time to study the development of rich countries, where they are today versus where they were 100 years ago, 50 years ago, they will see that many prosperous countries today were once emerging markets. They were countries that had demographics that are similar to emerging markets today. And I hope that inspires them. My hope is that in spreading our message, that inspires hope to a lot of emerging market investors and entrepreneurs.
That's definitely a very good way to end this episode, and I think that is something that a lot of people will be able to carry on with them. And this episode has been quite an inspiration. And Ms. Efosa, thanks you so much for your time. Thanks for sharing your knowledge, and we're looking forward to seeing the great work that you continue to do. So thank you so much, brother.
Thanks a lot, Jacob. Yeah. It's great to be here, and it's been my pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, bye for now. Take care, guys. Bye.